I used to think silence was neutral, that it meant nothing more than the absence of noise. I don't believe that anymore. The envelope arrived without a return address, cream-coloured, thick-stocked paper, my brother's name embossed in gold, my parents' names below in smaller script. I turned it over 3 times before opening it, as if the weight might change. Inside the date, the venue, a brief note. Please arrive promptly for the family photo. There was no Dear No Kais, just instructions. I looked at the RSVP line. No checkboxes, no space to confirm. Just the assumption that everyone who mattered had already been accounted for. At first, I thought it was an oversight, the kind that happens when people are busy, distracted, planning something big. I called the house. My mother picked up on the 3rd ring. I didn't ask why my name wasn't there. I asked if they needed help with the setup. Her pause was longer than the sentence that followed. We've discussed this. There's no need for you to come. It's already complicated enough. No raised voice, no accusation, just the finality of someone closing a door they'd already locked from the inside. Later that night, I found my old leather binder, the one with my name printed on the front from when I was still listed as Director of Sustainability for the estate. I opened the recent quarterly report, half expecting the numbers to still carry my notes in the margins. But someone had overwritten them black ink over blue. My title was gone. My name replaced. No notice. No explanation. When Charles Landry called, he didn't ask how I'd been. He never did. His tone was clipped, cautious. I'd advise you not to request any official copies. Legally speaking, your family has full authority now. It changed 6 weeks ago. You weren't listed on the amendment. I didn't ask who signed it. I already knew the handwriting would match the birthday cards I used to get formal identical each year, even the commas in the same place. On my fridge, there's still a faded magnet from the vineyard. The edges curl and the ink has bled from sun exposure, but the logo's still visible. Carmen had chosen the original font. She said it reminded her of hand-labeled jam jars. Something honest. I left the envelope open on the table. Didn't move it. Didn't throw it away. Silence, I've learned, isn't neutral. It's weighted. It leans in one direction, and right now it's pressing against my name. I thought that if I stayed quiet long enough, someone would notice the silence. After college, I came home with a degree that no one asked about. I chose soil science because it felt useful, unthreatening. Good, my mother had said, flipping through a wedding magazine. At least one of you understands the land. I nodded. I always nodded back then. Even when the research grant to Boston came through, I didn't tell anyone for weeks. I'd printed the acceptance letter and folded it into my notebook. No one asked why I kept flying back and forth that year. Jason had just joined a startup, and there wasn't room for 2 people with ambitions. At Christmas, I brought gifts wrapped in neutral paper tags, handwritten to match the ones under the tree. Mine never had a tag. The first year I assumed they'd forgotten. The second I wrote my own name and slipped it on an unclaimed box. You really shouldn't draw attention to things like that, my father had said, watching me from his armchair. It makes people uncomfortable. The family photo from that Easter still hangs in their foyer. I remember the white dress I wore, plain cotton, a little wrinkled at the sleeves. I'd ironed it that morning, but the car ride had been long. My mother pulled me aside before the photographer arrived. You don't think that's appropriate, do you? Her voice didn't rise. It looks homespun. I answered without looking up. It looks like me. Well, when the prints were mailed out, I wasn't in them. Matt had seen the exchange. He'd been helping with the outdoor set-up candles chair's floral arrangements. Later that week, he handed me a cluster of seed packets wrapped in wax paper. His hand brushed mine just long enough for the gesture to land. "If you're not here next season," he said, "I'm not either. I kept those seeds. Never planted them. They're still in the drawer with the apron I wore the day my name was removed from the family tasting room plaque. There was no protest, no speech. I never stood up in the middle of dinner and demanded to be heard. I just kept showing up softer each time until I became background. Furniture. Now, I wonder if quietness really was a choice, or if it was just the shape I was given to fit inside their house. I used to keep proof in a shoebox, newspaper clippings, certificates, old notes, not because I needed to remember, but because no one else would. The essay had taken me 3 weeks. I'd rewritten the conclusion 6 times, printed the final version on the office printer after hours. When it won the national award, I left the envelope on the hallway table. It stayed there 2 days before disappearing. "You're not planning to move back to Boston, are you?" My father stood in the doorway, holding his coffee like it might burn through the mug. I never mentioned the award again. The certificate stayed folded in my sock drawer, still creased from the first time I hid it. The wooden box had belonged to my grandmother. Small, carved the lid, slightly warped from sun exposure. I'd kept loose buttons and dried lavender inside until the day I gave it to Jamie. His room always felt like it needed something that didn't glow or make noise. At Lily's engagement party, I saw it on the gift table, wrapped in cellophane ribbon tied too tightly around the hinges. "I don't care for old stuff," Jamie had said. "She'll probably use it for makeup or something." I didn't ask for it back. I just stopped giving him things. When Grandma Carmen passed, the house went quiet in a way that didn't feel like grief. I stayed through the winter, shoveled the path, repaired the greenhouse door when it fell off its hinges, boiled soup, recorded the plants that still bloomed in the cold. No one visited. My mother called once to ask where the estate documents were kept. She didn't ask how I was. The funeral service was small. The program listed names, Jason's in bold. My name didn't appear. A woman I didn't recognize read the eulogy. She quoted a line from a gardening book, then glanced toward the front row as if searching for someone who'd validate it. I sat in the back coat, zipped up to my chin gloves still on. The week after, I cleaned out the inbox, tied to our shared family calendar. One email stood out. "Happy birthday to all our March babies," a stock image of a balloon and cupcake. My name was somewhere in the middle of the recipients list. Jason got a handwritten card. Inside, one line in cursive, "To the son who carries our name forward." The shoebox is still in my closet, though I haven't opened it in years. I'm not sure if what's inside proves anything now. Maybe it never did. I never thought a plastic chair could undo someone. The dress still smelled faintly of lavender water. I'd pressed it the night before, ran my fingers over the seams until the stitching felt like it might come undone. It used to belong to someone else. I found that out from the initials, stitched inside the lining, faint cursive, someone with an E. I didn't mind. I wore it anyway. At the vineyard entrance, no one stopped me. That's how you know you're not expected when you're too invisible to be questioned. My mother didn't raise her voice when she saw me. She never needed to. "Truly, you wore that!" Then a smile as if she'd complimented the weather. "You always did have a thrift store sense of timing." I didn't answer. I watched her turn to greet a woman in satin who wore her hair like it cost more than my rent. In the distance, a town car eased onto the gravel. I knew that slow curve of the door before it opened. My grandfather stepped out carefully, one hand on the frame. His tie was off-center, his shoes polished but soft at the heels. He carried nothing. No one met him. He saw me and lifted a hand. I walked toward him. He didn't speak, just nodded once like I'd arrived exactly when I needed to. A staff member in black approached. "He's at table 14, she muttered, already turning. We followed her around the fountain past the caterer's tent to a folding chair wedged between the back generator and two open bins. Flies hovered. I checked the seating chart again. The names stopped at 13. From behind me, a voice clipped through the air. He insisted on showing up. I told him it wouldn't be appropriate. I didn't turn. You know how he is. That smell he keeps using, those awful peppermint lozenges, like a bus station. And honestly, the way he eats. A pause. You can't blame us for keeping the tone elevated. I turned. Her bracelet caught the sun. He's your father. She didn't blink. He used to be. I walked toward the arch where people were being seated. I lifted a glass, tapped it gently with the side of a fork. Before we begin, I said, does anyone know why the man who built this land is sitting beside the trash? The air paused, then a heel clicked. You ungrateful thing. A hand rose. The sound wasn't loud, but it landed. Get out. Now. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just tasted metal at the back of my throat and chose not to swallow. There's a kind of silence that doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives and stays. My heels sank slightly into the gravel as I turned. The ground didn't resist, only gave way beneath the weight. I didn't rush. No one called after me. I passed the welcome arch again, the one with the embossed letters half peeled from too much heat. Someone laughed behind me, not at me, just loud enough to prove they still had an audience. A champagne glass had tipped near the walkway. No one picked it up. When I reached the end of the garden, I stopped beneath the olive tree with the lowest branches. The hem of my dress carried a stain I hadn't noticed before, darker than dust, maybe from one of the overturned bins. I brushed it once, then let my hand fall. Behind me, the sound of steps, slow, deliberate, a cane tapping, then stopping. He didn't speak, just offered something folded small and green, frayed at the corners. His fingers lingered until mine closed around it. A square of silk. The embroidery had loosened with age, one initial faint, not even mine. I didn't ask why he had it. I didn't ask what it meant. From where I stood, I could still see the string lights strung along the patio. The ones I had helped install 3 summers ago, when the renovation budget was tight. I remembered holding the ladder while Jason adjusted the bulbs. He'd asked if I thought the light was too warm. You never did have taste for these things, my mother had said, passing by later that evening. But at least you're good with practicals. My name hadn't been included in the project credits. Later, when the black car arrived and the hush fell over the reception, I didn't move forward. I didn't need to. I already knew what the silence meant. Margaret's voice cut through the speaker system, a tight, measured tone. We've made sacrifices to maintain legacy. No one applauded. Then his voice, no ceremony, no rehearsed rhythm, just plain truth in a room built on staging. I stayed behind the hedge, not out of fear, just to see how long it would take them to notice they'd been watching the wrong person. When he said my name, he didn't point. He just paused, let it settle like dust over polished glass, and for the first time I didn't step forward. I didn't need to. They already knew. There's a different kind of quiet that settles when no one is expecting you anywhere. The hinges creaked when I opened the shed door. I didn't fix them. I left the sound intact like something alive still remembered how to protest. Dust lifted in soft spirals. The floor had warped near the sink, and one of the window panes had cracked clean through like a line drawn too hard on paper. I found the old kettle buried beneath a stack of yellowed recipe cards. I boiled water even though I wasn't cold. The mug I chose had a chipped rim. I turned it so my lip wouldn't touch the break. The table still held faint rings from glasses long dried. I ran my fingers over them slowly, the way people do with tree stumps when counting years. I hadn't opened the sketchbook in over a decade. The spine had softened, and the ink bled slightly at the corners. I used to label everything: soil types, drainage angles, companion plants. Page 23 had a plan for a slope that never got cleared. I'd named it Carmen's Grace in pencil small bottom right. No one else ever saw it. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just kept turning pages until I reached the blank ones. Someone left a crate by the door, apples still warm from the sun, and a folded sheet of soil pH readings. No note. Just the facts, printed in neat rows. I recognized the handwriting. Matt always used block caps for headings. My phone stayed face down. No missed calls, no alerts. The battery lasted 3 days untouched. I didn't charge it. The apron I wore while clearing the floorboards still smelled faintly of rosemary and mineral oil. A fray had opened in the stitching near the hem. I didn't sew it shut. One afternoon I drew a new irrigation route in the margins of the original map. Not for approval, not for grant funding, just because I could. I circled a corner patch and wrote the word, maybe. When I sat on the floor to rest, I let my back lean against the wall where Grandma used to keep seed jars. The nails were still there lined up in a row, like something waiting to be useful again. Nobody told me to stop. Nobody told me to explain. And that might have been the closest I'd come to something that resembled peace. Recognition doesn't always arrive with apology. Sometimes it comes dressed like concern. The article ran on page 6 beneath a story about a local farmer's market expansion. One column, no photo. Whitmore Air resumes operations at family vineyard. I didn't clip it. I let it yellow on the table before tossing it with the eggshells. The knock on the door came just before noon. I knew the rhythm, 2 slow, 1 sharp. My mother never liked waiting. When I opened it, her scarf was wrapped too tightly like it might hold her face in place. My father stood slightly behind her, blinking against the sun, his tie already loosened. Jamie didn't look at me. He held a leather folder under one arm and a bottle of wine under the other. You've done something here. Her eyes swept across the porch over the tools, the clipboard, the chalk marks on the siding. But, let's be honest, this isn't scalable. You'll need guidance. I offered them water. No one accepted. Jamie cleared his throat. The name still carries weight. That matters. The folder opened. Charts proposals a mocked-up rebranding strategy. My father tapped the margins with a capped pen. Investors need clarity. You understand? I asked if they came because they were proud. My mother didn't flinch. We came because perception is fragile. There was no mention of the chair near the bins, no reference to microphones or guest lists or documents sealed in cabinets. Only numbers, metrics, estate taxes. You're making this personal, she added. It doesn't have to be. The coffee I'd made earlier had gone cold. A ring formed at the base of the mug, faint, circular like something once held, had now faded into the surface. I didn't pour it out. They stayed 23 minutes. No one asked what I'd planted, or how long I'd lived in the shed, or where I'd been the week after the ceremony. No one asked if I'd eaten. As she stood to leave, my mother adjusted the cuffs of her blazer. You need to be careful. Pride doesn't age well in women. I watched her tuck her scarf tighter, watched Jamie hand the unopened bottle to my father, like a prop no longer needed. No one hugged goodbye. After the car disappeared down the hill, I returned to the back wall of the shed. A new sketch rested on the table. I traced a line across the lower field and added a note in pencil, not for them. Then I folded the map and didn't say anything at all. I didn't realize the difference between fixing something and caring for it until I stopped trying to repair what never wanted to hold me. The brooch had tarnished at the edges. I found it wrapped in linen at the bottom of a drawer I almost didn't open. The clasp still worked. I pinned it to the inside of my collar where no one else would see it, just close enough that I could feel its weight. I drew new lines across the soil map, not because anyone asked, but because I'd started thinking in contours again. Drainage, slope, afternoon, light. I labelled one patch Carmen's Grace using the same handwriting I once practiced to match hers. No flourish, just steady. Nina dropped off a crate of tools and didn't linger. She left a note taped to the handle of the hoe. You already know what you're doing. Just trust your feet. I wore gloves that didn't match. One was frayed at the thumb. I kept it anyway. When I tore a sleeve on the gate, I stitched it myself with thread from an old emergency kit. The needle bent once. I straightened it with pliers. During the first tasting, I poured alone. Just one glass. The label was temporary, handwritten, taped on. I lifted it and held it against the light. I didn't swirl, didn't sniff, didn't analyze. I drank, slowly, without measuring what it meant. The journal I'd abandoned after college now held penciled lists, daily tasks, weather notes, reminders to rotate compost. I added names of people I needed to thank, not for favors, for choosing to see me when no one else did. Someone left a voicemail that week. My mother's tone clipped and rehearsed. Image matters more than sentiment. Keep that in mind if you plan to do this publicly. She didn't mention the brooch. She didn't know I had it. I didn't return the call. Matt brought over a crate of young vines. He didn't say much, only pointed to a ridgeline and nodded once. I added it to the sketchbook and underlined the slope. Maybe. I folded the letter I wrote to him and left it on the gate. Just one line. Thank you for not calling me strong, just real. That night, I sat near the barrel shed with the brooch still pinned. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't need the title anymore. What I'd reclaimed wasn't theirs to give back. It had always belonged to whoever chose to stay. I used to fold letters carefully, as if gentleness might change what they said. The envelope arrived without a return name, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. A slight tilt to the right, like it couldn't quite decide between command and courtesy. Inside a cream-colored card, heavier than necessary. Embossed edges, a note in dark ink. Family Unity dinner prior to shareholder briefing. Kindly attend. Presence expected. No mention of what had happened. No reference to the vineyard or the shed or the man who stood by me. Just the word expected underlined once. I placed the card on the table and left it there for 2 days, not as protest, just to see if time would dull the weight. It didn't. Matt dropped off a box of samples that morning. He noticed the envelope untouched. They want a picture, not a person. He didn't wait for a reply. I ran my thumb along the edge of the card, then scanned it again. One line stood out near the bottom. Let's not create tension where none is needed. I wondered if they practiced saying that in the mirror. I didn't RSVP. Instead, I printed the card again, same size, same paper. I added one line at the bottom in handwriting I no longer tried to match. I'm sending this to someone it belongs to. I no longer need that chair to know my worth. I folded it, once sealed it, and wrote the old address in block letters. No return name. Just a small, pressed flower tucked inside a piece of lavender from the vineyard's edge. Carmen used to say some things only bloom when left alone. That evening I sat on the back fence, boots' dusty hands marked from pruning. The air smelled faintly of yeast and smoke from a neighbor's stove. I pulled an old letter from my pocket, Carmen's note on crop rotation, written in pencil. Faint smudge at the corner where her thumb used to rest. Matt leaned against the post beside me. Still thinking about it, I handed him the letter without speaking. He read it slowly, then gave it back. You kept the right part. I nodded once. I had thought the absence of their approval would feel like a fracture. Instead, it felt like the end of a long breath held too long. I didn't check the mailbox the next day. There was nothing left I needed returned. I no longer count time in days, only in how much water each vine has taken. The kettle whistles faintly, not from urgency, but habit. I place it beside the window, Carmen's window where the sill still bears a faint ring from her tea. The cup I use is chipped near the handle. I keep turning it, so the crack rests against my palm. Outside, I water the quiet row by hand. I don't rush. Each vine gets the same care, the same pause. I don't speak to them. I listen. Near the gate, I've placed a plaque in the soil. Bronze, small, brushed, but not polished, for those who bloom after being buried. No one helped me write that. The notebook lies open on the table. I've added a new sketch, simple rows shaded in pencil. I named them only once, the quiet row. Nothing else. Matt brought the paper this morning. You made the news again. I read the headline, folded it without a word, and placed it under a rock. I sit by the vines as the sun rises. They don't need to know my name. They just need water. And I still have hands.